Today, we're going to take a look at what comes next for Cardano, not in terms of, hey, it's just Basho and Voltaire, but in terms of what's actually going to happen in the ecosystem. Ready? Let's go. It's been an action-packed couple of days. We've got quite a bit of information to cover from a variety of sources, so I'm probably going to have to move a little bit quicker than normal as we go through all these different topics. But I think many of you probably already know exactly which topic I'm going to start with. I am so excited for this. Look at this thing. You've got some kind of prehistoric avatar looking land. There's like manta rays flying through the sky. There's these rocks that are all levitating on top of colored streams of light. You've got this little, what is it, a Teletubby? It's got wings on its head. Seems to be wearing a raincoat. It's concerned about rain. This looks awesome. I don't understand how all 7 worlds are going to work. This is obviously the one that is built on the back of a turtle. You can see the turtle fin there. I think later on you can see either a head or a tail of a turtle. This looks awesome. I'm assuming there's something with those beams of light. Maybe you can go to the 7 different virtual worlds via those beams of light. Nobody knows, but this looks awesome. I don't see any other blockchains building things like this just so they have a virtual world for their summits. One thing I'm super curious about, they only show one character kind of walking this landscape. I'm super curious to see if multiple users can exist in the same instance of these worlds. Like if we'll be walking around and be able to see and maybe interact with other people walking around as well, or if each user will just sort of exist in their own instance of this world running on the server. So that's going to be super interesting. Either way, I think it's awesome. In another little standalone piece of information, we saw this kind of being reported by the COTI community. It says, new product with Cardano to be announced in the Cardano Summit. We know a little bit already about a COTI Cardano Wolfram NFT marketplace, I think it was. But we don't know if this is something else or if this is sort of the unveiling of something to do with that. But it looks like there's something, according to this report, it looks like there is something coming involving a Cardano and COTI partnership that we'll find out this weekend at the summit. We also got a pretty big AMA from Charles, and he buzzed through quite a bit of information right at the start of the AMA before he started taking questions. He mentioned that after the Cardano Summit, he's going to spend a couple weeks up in Montana on the Bison Ranch, and then he's going to come back to work and pretty much immediately go to Africa, where he will visit South Africa, Burundi, Malawi, Zanzibar, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And I think he said he was going to be able to visit 5 heads of state. Obviously, that's more than 5 countries there, so we don't know which of those he's going to be able to visit the heads of state. But this looks like great progress in sort of like the nation-state partnership side of Cardano. Charles also talked a little bit about what we're going to see developed after the Cardano Summit. He talked about block sizes getting bigger. This is probably important for Basho and scaling. He talked about congestion control protocols being put in place, ledger improvements, compression at the script level, syntactic sugar being put in, rapid evolution of the Plutus application backend, Mithril, sidechains, and sort of more information on the Basho agenda. So it sounds like there's going to be a pretty big focus on a lot of the Basho scaling stuff and also adoption. Speaking of adoption, Charles also had a bit to say about what we're going to see at this summit. Apparently, there will be 4 tracks at the summit. I think we also had separate tracks last year, if I remember right. We'll have 4 tracks at the summit. There'll be utility, adoption, governance, and impact. Those all seem pretty straightforward. I think I know what a utility, adoption, and governance are. I'm not sure what the impact track will be. I'm not sure if that's sort of impact on groups of people, like the impact of, various nation-state partnerships, that kind of thing. Environmental impact. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Charles also said that he's had musicians reaching out to him. It sounds like they want to be a part of the summit, including Paul Oakenfold and ZZ Top. Charles also talked a little bit more about the summit's virtual world. He said it was a company called Active Theory that worked on the virtual world. There would actually be 7 virtual worlds, and Charles personally helped design the world on the back of the turtle that we saw in the trailer. He said it sounds like he was inspired by Never Ending Story, which created quite a bit of nostalgia for me, having watched that show as a kid and loved it. I think people were even commenting about Never Ending Story because I think anybody who was the right age who watched that movie remembers the turtle with all the trees growing on the back of its shell, that whole thing, and the difficult interaction the main character had with that turtle. But Charles also said this was kind of interesting, straying a little bit from the summit information. Charles mentioned that they have 500 deals in the pipeline, which is so many they're probably going to have to cut off 100 of those deals. As always, Charles fielded about a million other questions covering a wide variety of topics. I'll let you check that out if you're interested. Charles also did this interview last week with the Forecast News channel on YouTube. That's FORKAST News. The interview was only about 51 minutes long, but I've noticed this trend with Charles. When he's being interviewed by someone else, he tends to give up more information than he would in just a normal AMA. I've seen this a few different times, and this was no exception to that. So Charles told us quite a few things. He said the market isn't aware of all the things Cardano has built into the protocol, but there's a lot in the commercial pipeline in the next 6 to 12 months coming online, and that'll bring millions of users. And it sounds like he thinks the market will become much more aware of just how capable the Cardano blockchain is once all those users are sort of brought into the ecosystem via these commercial projects. Charles also made a really interesting observation about the Cardano ecosystem. This whole thing, Cardano, only costs $72 million, which is, of course, over the budget of the funds provided by the ICO in Japan. And Charles says he covered the additional amounts out of pocket, but pretty good bargain if you compare it to the fact that EOS collected $4 billion in their ICO, and we know what EOS amounted to. Charles also talked a bit about DeFi and sort of market conditions for DeFi. I said DeFi is in a bubble. It's not a bad thing. It's just that the market is having a hard time pricing it. And there's something fundamentally wrong with some of the DeFi project valuations when these small teams are building these unicorns, projects worth over $1 billion in very short periods of time. He sort of compared that to traditional Silicon Valley projects where people might work, for 5 years and be super stoked they achieved unicorn status in like 5 years. Whereas in Cardano, you might have somebody working, in a very, very small team and producing a DeFi project in like 5 weeks, and all of a sudden they've hit unicorn status. Charles said there will also be a regulatory crackdown in months to years, and referenced the same kind of stuff we've covered quite a bit on this channel, including what we've heard out of Gary Gensler, the chair of the SEC. Charles was willing to say that there will be a regression in DeFi, and he said the second wave of DeFi will be sort of a reaction to this regression in DeFi, and that this next wave of DeFi will do it with actual decentralization, where none of the current DeFi protocols have really done these things with any level of decentralization yet. He mentioned that this new wave of DeFi will need to include things like digital identity and metadata to support this coming surge in regulation. Charles also talked about the need in our industry for a canonical dApp store. And kind of surprisingly, he said that probably the telcos have the best chance of doing this, since Apple and Google can't prevent them from having independent app stores. It was interesting because he was kind of embracing a little bit of a notion that a lot of growth can happen in the developing world because of the lack of sound money and financial infrastructure. You can onboard huge numbers of people, but to onboard people in the developed world, you probably have to do it through mobile adoption of dApps. With dApps, Charles said that most of the action in the future will probably live on layer 2 because you're going to need the fee predictability if you're going to have mainstream use of these dApps, and that layer 1 will be more like the proof checker and the batcher and the settlement of last resort. Charles also got a question about NFTs here, and he had a discussion which he also kind of got into a little bit in the AMA today. So Charles thinks that you could chalk the current NFT bubble, and yes, he does call it a bubble. And in fact, in the AMA today, he said there will be a big bubble bust in NFTs. But he chalks this bubble up to either irrational exuberance, or it's money laundering. And if you haven't thought much about this before, it's the money laundering would happen. Somebody has some illicit crypto. They want to make it to appear not to be from an illicit source. So they go and list an NFT. They buy it from themselves and say, I don't know where the money came from because I just sold an NFT and somebody, paid me X amount of crypto. No idea who the buyer is, even though it's themselves. They just send it from one wallet to another wallet and say it was actually an arm's length transaction with somebody they don't know. So it looks like there's a pretty big money laundering gap here. Charles believes there will be AML KYC of NFTs to close this money laundering gap at some point in the future. And he thinks after this big bust comes in NFTs, things will kind of settle down and get to more of a sustainable place because there is actual value in NFTs. It's just that a rock JPEG may not be worth $1 million right now. So, or it could be worth $1 million right now, but after the bubble bursts, it may not be. Where he thinks we'll continue to find sustainable value in NFTs are NFTs that he describes as difficult to create. And by that, he doesn't mean like the mechanics of minting the NFT, the actual technical mechanics of doing it. What he means is that he thinks things like gaming NFTs, where you have to do, a lot of like in-game grinding and things like that and spend a certain number of hours to produce an NFT. He thinks that those types of NFTs that are difficult for the end user to obtain, like they have to do a bunch of work to obtain the NFT, those are the NFTs that will have a lot of value, and they'll also be valuable to the developers once we're able to program residual royalties into those NFTs so that the developer gets paid every time the NFT sells and not just right up front when they sell the NFT for the first time. I've definitely talked a lot about how I'm really looking forward to functional NFTs. So I'm definitely with Charles on this one because certainly NFTs that correspond to something you earn and can use in a video game are very functional. Charles also got a question about what he thought the top 5 smart contract use cases would be. And you've probably seen on Twitter lately, Charles is definitely agreeing with people that say that smart contract is the wrong term for us to be using in crypto, and especially in Cardano in the UTXO context. So I think he's trying to shift the nomenclature a little bit more towards dApp in these kinds of interviews. But he cited first digital identity and reputation. If you follow Charles's AMAs and the work in Cardano, that's pretty predictable. He said trustless algorithmic stablecoins, cited JED. He talked about fractional ownership and liquidity. That's kind of the tokenization of real world assets kind of use case. He also mentioned replacing corporations with DAOs. We've had long discussions about this, exactly how that might happen in past videos. Feel free to go back and check those out if you're interested in a discussion on that. And his final use case of his top 5 was transparency. And he cited the example of government spending, in that he would love to create some blockchain-based transparency around government spending. And Charles put a 3 to 5 year timeline on achieving some of these. I think the interviewer was kind of expecting what the typical crypto person would give as their answer and just kind of like cite the top 5 different types of DeFi platforms, like, loans, synthetics, automated market makers, that kind of thing. Of course, Charles, none of those things end up on his list, but I'm looking forward to watching Cardano build these out over the next 5 years. I hope you are too, and I will talk to you tomorrow.